It's another day and another attack on Zack Polanski. This one came from the Times with an opinion piece titled Green's Policies Hold Grave Dangers and Must Be Taken Seriously. Well, Zack saw this headline and he posted it on Instagram with the caption, Another day, another clutching of pearls hit piece. Today, courtesy of the Times. I'm not sure if the Daily Mail or the Express are on the rota for tomorrow. It's good because not only is it funny, but it also calls them out as predictable. If you make the first move, everything your opponent is doing looks reactive. If the Telegraph or the Express, prints an article tomorrow attacking Zack Polanski, they're now in a weaker position because Zack has already called them out on it. This is part of the point. It's part of the strategy. So, what is this terror that Zack Polanski will bring to UK politics? Well, let's take a closer look at that Times article. The Greens, who won 4 seats in last year's election, are no longer the party that most voters might consider anodyne, and nice. Their new leader is calling for a wealth tax, heedless of the failure of similar policies the world over, and denounces his opponents, not least in Reform UK, as fascists and racists. He accuses the UK government of aiding and abetting a genocide in Gaza with all the flair and fluency of a former actor. Mr. Polanski is polarizing and coarsening political discourse. So, in a country that had race riots last year in which people tried to burn down hotels full of refugees that supported Palestinian children getting blown apart by munitions, and where 31%, almost 1 in 3 UK children are living in poverty, calling for a wealth tax is a dangerous idea and is coarsening political discourse. Are you kidding me? I wonder why the Times, owned and run for the benefit of the multi-millionaire and billionaire class, might be opposed to a wealth tax. The Times article then goes on. His gospel of class envy, preached with self-righteous moral clarity and without regard for economic and fiscal reality, is attracting legions of idealistic new believers. We're believers now, guys. Millions of Britons in their 20s and 30s who have been frozen out of the housing market and condemned to unfulfilling work on stagnant wages. As one of those people, I can't help but feel that this article was written by some trust fund dweeb who has never had to work a real job in their life, calling it class envy on the one hand, but also saying that millions of young people are stuck in poverty and unable to access housing. Like, how do you hold those two ideas in your in your head at once without connecting them? Implies envy implies it's unjustified. But where did all that housing go? It didn't evaporate. Shelter estimates that there are 10 empty houses for every one homeless family in the UK. Who owns those empty houses? They didn't just evaporate. Multimillionaires and billionaires own the houses. Who is suppressing their wages while making record profits? Multimillionaires and billionaires. The Green leader has mooted leaving NATO and cannot define what a woman is, and with government borrowing at a 5-year high, his threadbare economic prospectus of high tax and fantastical levels of spending is a recipe for fiscal meltdown. Okay, so firstly, leaving NATO is not on the cards. That's not Green Party policy. That's Zack's personal view. It doesn't become policy unless members vote for it. And also, he just wants an alternative. He doesn't want to just suddenly jump out of NATO. He wants to build up an alternative and then move across. I've seen Zack speak about this before, so I know. Zack can define what a woman is. That's point 2. Trans-obsessed chucklefucks love to say that you don't know what a woman is if you disagree with their definition. But that's not him not knowing. That's you whinging that he won't accept your genital mania definition. That's not the same thing. He knows what a woman is. He just disagrees with your definition. These whiny snowflakes just can't accept that somebody might disagree with them. Also, we've done 15 years of austerity. It's just made everything worse. Nothing works. Everyone hates it. If you haven't realized by now that you need to invest in infrastructure and education to grow the economy, frankly, you're unqualified to be a banker in a game of Monopoly, let alone comment on economics. Zack, Zack? You're not Zack. Curtis, what do you make of these attacks on Zack Polanski? And do you think he's taking the right angle in response?
It was soy woke right-wing nonsense. I mean, in that article, and Jeremy Clarkson penned an article in the Times attacking Zack Polanski as well, attacking his teeth and other physical appearances. There was no evidence, there was no facts, there was no argument. It was just moaning. Oh, he wants to raise taxes. Oh, poor billionaires. Bring an argument, right? Because the left does like to debate, by the way. I've always thought the right wing doesn't like to debate. They like to shout you down. But let's have a debate on wealth tax. I'm all here for it. I'm sure Zach is as well. But all it is just moaning. And I think the Times, look, Times is a Murdoch rag. It's dressed up as better, but the Times used to at least have the veneer of respectability, even though it was mostly waffling nonsense. It felt like it was written better. Now they just don't care. They're upset. Um, I mean, there's so much crap to go through in terms of raising taxes, it being fiscally irresponsible. That is crazy. After, as you said, 15 years of austerity, we've had a failed economic system, one of privatization, one of public spending cuts, and reducing taxes on the wealthy. How has that worked? Because the Times acknowledged, right, that young people are being priced out of getting a home. Do people think this economic system works? No one thinks it works, yet it wants to say the alternative. Because what is the opposite of tax cuts and reducing spending? It's spending more and increasing taxes. That's the opposite. That doesn't work either. Again, I want to hear an argument as to why these economic policies are bad, rather than Zach is envious and Zach is being mean to billionaires. Now, let's just be very, very clear here when it comes to reducing inequality. This has nothing to do with being envious. Right? This is not about saying, I wish I was rich. I wish I was a billionaire. We're going to tax them because it's not fair. Throw the toys at the pram. That's not how it works. Number one, we shouldn't have billionaires. And this isn't a moral argument, right? You can frame it that way if you want, but I'm more interested in the economic argument. Having the existence of billionaires means there's too much power concentrated through in the hands of the few. When you have multi-millionaires and billionaires, it means they buy everything. They own everything. And that means ordinary working class people, middle class people cannot participate in the economy in a meaningful way. They can't get their own assets. There was the right wing love to buy into this myth that wealth is created, right? I've heard it on Fox News before, which is that the rich create wealth. You cannot create wealth because wealth is different to money, right? You could say, well, you can print money and you can put more money into circulation, but that's not creating wealth. In fact, even though I like some of the ideas of modern monetary theory, I think endless quantitative easing is actually bad. It can increase inequality, right? Maybe that's another discussion for another day. But that's not increasing wealth. You cannot create wealth because wealth is usually tied to resources in assets, and you can't just share it. We don't live in an abundant world. And by the way, that word abundance might be triggering because the libs have now adopted the abundance. We just need to, which is funny, by the way. They think this new idea is just more neoliberalism. It's tax cuts, deregulation, and basically, hopefully, companies will build loads of stuff. That's never works. I mean, we have more scarcity, I think, than we've had in the last couple of decades. We've not had. I mean, it's not through a lack of resources; it's the hoarding of resources. So when you have the existence of billionaires and multimillionaires, that means the resources, the assets, are controlled by the top 1%, the 0.1%, whatever you want to characterize it as. And that's why it's so important to reduce inequality. Wealth taxes is not about bringing in money. I made this case on Monday. Zach's made this case. I think Richard Murphy is currently on Bold Politics right now. He will make this case. And taxation is not bringing about money to the treasury. We can spend money anyway. We tax afterwards, in fact, because we want to control inflation and we want to leverage good on bad behavior. Taxes is literally just to reduce inequality because money equals power. We shouldn't have, because it's not just about abolishing billionaires, by the way. We shouldn't have someone with £100 million. And again, this isn't crazy hard left thinking. This isn't envious. In fact, I would hate to be a multimillionaire. I think it'd be depressing. I think there'd be so much burden on my shoulders to think all the poverty out there and I can solve it with my money. I guess maybe if you're a multimillionaire or billionaire, you kind of had to exploit loads of people and you're just a psychopath, so you don't care. But I don't want to be that rich. I just want to be comfortable. I want to get a house and have a decent paying job, which is what the 99% of people want. Right? guarantee if you ask most people, they say, what wage do you want? People will say like maybe 70 to 100 grand, max 150. But people aren't aspiring to be multi-millionaires, I don't think. I think people are aspiring to have an economy that works for them. And you can only have that if you reduce inequality, you reduce the power of the multi-millionaires and billionaires, because guess what? A billionaire can call it the prime minister. We can't do that. And that's what it's all about. But the problem is, Times, the mainstream media, the corporate media, are owned by the same billionaires who are so psychotically greedy that the idea of a 1% or 2% tax on wealth that's worth £10 million or more is somehow envious. It's insane stuff. To answer your second question, though, is this effective? Of course, it's effective, right? One of the paragraphs in that article, it said that the Greens used to be nice, right? We don't want the left to be nice. We don't want the Greens to be nice. That was the problem under the previous leadership, that they were too nice. You want aggressive leadership. And the reason why the attacks are happening, and quite intense attacks, the same as Jeremy Corbyn, by the way, means they're rattled. There was a recent YouGov poll that put the Greens on 15%. Now, of course, we covered the Find Out Now poll that has the Green Party on 15%. Find Out Now often inflates Reform's numbers, which could potentially inflate Green Party numbers too, because obviously, the polling would show Labour loses more support. But a YouGov poll, I mean, that's a well-respected poll, largely, have them on 15%. So the second poll, they're on 15%. There's been a series of polls that put the Greens on 10, 11, 12, 13%. Double the amount of votes they got, or amount of percentage of votes they got in the general election of 6%. Right? They are rattling these people, and they're scared because Zack Polanski is moving the Overton window back to the left, framing everything to economic issues, and not abandoning social issues, by the way. You don't see him do that, but he frames, like Bernie Sanders, he frames everything back to economics, everything back to wealth inequality, and that's popular for people. And the elites, the multimillionaires and billionaires, are fucking shitting themselves.
If you do any combat sport, you whether that's something that's like full contact, well, like boxing or Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or if you do something like chess, you never leave your opponent in a position where they're free to attack you and you can't attack them, right? Attacking is a fundamental part of defense. And I think this is why people are so keen to get behind Zach Polanski, because he's taking the fight to where the right wing are. And if you take the fight to them, ultimately they're not in a position to attack you, and you don't feel like you're in a corner, just shield up, just sort of like trying to shield yourself from all the attacks that are constantly coming up, that are hitting you, which I feel like is how a lot of the political left has felt for the past like 5 years at least.
Well, it was Ronald Reagan who said, "If you're explaining, you're losing."
Yeah,
And the problem for the left historically, and I think the problem for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour leadership, was constantly on the defence, batting away attacks. And even though most of it won't stick, some of it will. But it doesn't really matter what the lie is. All you're seeing through the prism of, ordinary people who are not political nerds like us, right? Turn on the TV for 5 minutes to watch politics and get bored of it. We'll see a man being relentlessly attacked from all corners, constantly defending himself, and people are not going to view you in a good light. They're going to be like, right, okay, well, some of these attacks seem insane, but maybe he's being attacked for a reason. Maybe he's just that bad. And if you're explaining, then you've lost. You don't want to give, like I said, give the upper hand to your political opponent. So what you need to do is define yourself, right? Don't allow opponents to define you, which is why it's important not just to defend yourself against attacks. You have to go on the attack yourself. And Zach is doing that. If you don't, right, even if you're a very confident, formidable person who's great at debating, but says, I want to play politics nice, I just want to stick to policy, and yes, if there's an attack my way, I'll bat it away. Unfortunately, in today's age, that's still a flaw. You have to go out and attack, because when you do that, the media will then say, for example, Zach attacks reform on this. I mean, when Zach said that Richard Tice is the biggest tit in politics, very funny line, that's in the media, right? And guess what? Richard Tice or the media or reform or whatever are going to have to respond to that attack. But what people hear is Zack Polanski is on the front foot. He's commanding the debate, even if sometimes it misses and it backfires. He looks like a strong person in command, and that is what is so important, and what the left has really not done for a very, very long time.
Yeah, it was really good to see Zach putting together a press conference. Also, Zoran Mamdani has the most incredible message discipline.
Mm,
Like we should also be looking to Zoran Mamdani to learn, because every time that Zoran Mamdani is asked a question, I think I may be misremembering, but I think Zoran Mamdani was asked, what do you think about what do you think about the attack on October 7th? Da 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 da. And he said something along the lines of, well, I don't know anything about the attack on October 7th. Really, I'm not here to speak on October 7th or Palestine or Israel, but I am concerned about the attacks on
mm.
affordability for ordinary New Yorkers who can no longer have a city that they can afford to live in. It's just the message discipline on that
Mm.
man is insane. Like
And
every time he brings it back to affordability.
and sorry to cut you off, even in that instance where someone might have, a negative reaction to that, because it's like, "Oh, we're speaking about October 7th, like, how dare he speaks about the cost of living," which, I think is important to say, right? Even if someone goes, "Oh, that makes them look like a bit of an arsehole," that actually doesn't matter. All they're hearing over and over again is freeze the rent, cost of living, freeze the rent, cost of living. So
Mm,
even sometimes when you're delivering a message and people feel like it's in poor taste or it's not appropriate at the time, or you know, they can see that you're trying to shoehorn in your talking point, that's fine, because if the talking point is there, it's like, for example, really annoying adverts. Go compare, for example, We Buy Any Car. You fucking hate them. When it comes on TV, you're like, shut the fuck up. It's so annoying. But if you want to buy a car or you want to compare insurance, right? You're like, fuck, it's that stupid guy with the mustache. And then you type it in and use their service. So even if you have a politician who keeps on talking about inequality, wealth taxes, billionaires, right? Even if you're watching that going, oh, here we goes again, talking about that, that also doesn't matter, because when it comes to general election time, and then you look at your wage slip and you go, fucking hell, the billionaires are getting away with everything. You'd be like, I don't know if I even really like Zack Polanski, but he's the only one speaking about this. Maybe I'm going to vote for him. Like, message discipline
mm.
isn't always about coming across well or likable, although I do happen to think that Zack does come across quite likable. That's not the main thing. It's wedging certain political points in your head, just like reform, right? Stop the boats. Attacks on immigration. These are slogans that even if you were to say a politician like Rishi Sunak, people are like, "Oh, he's an arsehole. I don't like the way he's saying this." It doesn't matter. The slogan itself is what's got into the political zeitgeist. And then suddenly people are concerned about stopping the votes. So if everyone speaks about wealth taxes, even if you're not the best communicator, right? Even if you're annoying people, put those ideas on the agenda. Change the political landscape.